Oral questions, questions orales. L'honorable leader de l'opposition.
Monsieur le Président, les Canadiens savent que des projets comme Énergie créent des emplois bien rémunérés. Aujourd'hui, TransCanada a annoncé un accord avec ABB Canada qui va créer 210 emplois directs et indirects au Québec. Mais le Premier ministre insiste sur de nouveaux obstacles et de nouveaux retards. Avec tous les emplois qui pourraient être créés, pourquoi le Premier ministre ne supporte pas Énergie Est?
Honorable ministre des Finances.
Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to be in Alberta a few weeks ago and to meet with members of the oil and gas community, and they reinforced for me the incredible importance of getting their resources to Tidewater. We've had 9 years of failure in getting resources to Tidewater. We are not going to take that failed approach. We're taking a new approach to get social license so we can actually move resources to Tidewater and improve our economic situation.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
I talk to a lot of Albertans and they know exactly who's standing up for their jobs, and it's this party. The Energy East project continues to grow. Yesterday, the Saskatchewan Urban Municipalities Association passed a resolution with overwhelming support for Energy East. That's 479 local governments in Saskatchewan. Alberta is hurting, but Saskatchewan is hurting too. Why can't the Prime Minister finally show workers he cares and support Energy East?
The Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize the enormous challenges facing Albertan families, facing families in Saskatchewan, facing families in Newfoundland because of the significant change in the price of oil. The Prime Minister tonight will be in Alberta meeting with the Premier of Alberta. He's going to be talking about ways we can work together to deal with the economic situation. I just want to say that the Minister of Infrastructure, the Minister of Veterans Affairs, my caucus colleagues from Alberta, from Saskatchewan, from Newfoundland, are incredibly strong advocates for families from those communities.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about who supports Energy East. The Liberal Premier in New Brunswick, the Conservative Premier in Saskatchewan, the Liberal Premier in Ontario, and of course the NDP Premier in Alberta. Right. Why this all-party support? Because this is about jobs for people who are suffering. The Liberal government.
The Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have said repeatedly in this House that we realize that we need to help those organizations that are producing oil to get it to Tidewater. We are working hard to do that. We are setting up a process that will get social license so that we won't have the same failure that's happened over the last 9 years to actually deliver on the promise. We're going to deliver for this for Canadians.
L'honorable député de Bellechasse-Lévis.
Monsieur le Président, le secteur énergétique pique du nez, entraîne avec lui plus de 40 000 pertes d'emplois. Pendant ce temps, les libéraux mettent des bâtons dans les roues des promoteurs. Ils ajoutent 9 mois de délai additionnel pour le développement de projets comme le pipeline Énergie Est qui approvisionnera la raffinerie Valero de Lévis au Québec. Au lieu de soutenir l'économie, le gouvernement ouvre les valves pour creuser un déficit qui endettera les générations futures. Pourquoi abandonne-t-il le secteur énergétique? Pourquoi abandonne-t-il les travailleuses et les travailleurs de Lévis et les familles qui en dépendent?
The Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I recognize there's enormous challenges for people in Alberta. We know that we need to work together with people in Alberta, we need to work together with people in Saskatchewan, we need to work together with people in Newfoundland. I spoke last week with the Alberta Minister of Finance to talk about ways we could work together. A good example is the Stabilization Fund. They will be putting forward a request so that they can get up to $250 million from this fund. We believe that's an important first step. We'll be taking other actions in Budget 2016.
Yes. L'honorable député de Bellechasse et d'Etchemin-Lévis.
Secteur énergétique, construction navale, même abandon des libéraux, Monsieur le Président, qui renient leurs promesses et abandonnent les travailleuses et les travailleurs canadiens. Alors qu'ils clamaient en campagne vouloir investir davantage dans les chantiers navals canadiens, voilà qu'ils veulent faire construire des bateaux à l'étranger. Et pourtant, nous avons plusieurs chantiers maritimes ayant les capacités et l'expertise requises ici au Canada. Monsieur le Président, est-ce que la ministre responsable des approvisionnements va respecter sa promesse de faire construire les navires de la Marine par des Canadiens au Canada pour créer des emplois ici, chez nous?
Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Monsieur le Président, merci à mon collègue pour la question. The government remains committed to the national shipbuilding strategy. We want to see our ships built in Canada. That's exactly what we are doing. If there comes an occasion when we have to look, particularly on the defence front, in terms of tugs that are needed in the system, then we certainly may look at a more efficient, effective way of procuring those. But at this point in time, we are committed to building our ships in Canada.
Député d'Outremont.
Speaker, I had the honour of going to La Loche yesterday and visiting with our extraordinary colleague, the member for Deneste, Missinippi, Churchill River. The pain in the community following the tragic shootings runs deep, but so do the scars of centuries of colonialism, racism, and indifference. I was told by elders how important it is to promote and protect their language and culture in the community, to provide hope and instill pride in young people. Since the Prime Minister committed to implementing every one of the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations, will the upcoming budget include funding to make good on this important commitment for Aboriginal languages?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
I thank the member for his question, but also for his visit to La Loche. This is hugely important that that community know that all Canadians are behind them, and we thank you for going. And I will go on Tuesday, and I too know how important language and culture is. Together with the Minister of Heritage, who has in her mandate to protect language, I have the responsibility to make sure that is present in kindergarten to grade 12, and we will do that. And it is hugely important to secure personal cultural identity is essential to good health, education, and economic outcomes.
The Honourable Member for Outremer.
The TPP, Mr. Speaker, was secretly negotiated in the dying days of the Conservative government. Independent studies say tens of thousands of Canadians stand to lose their jobs. Those aren't just numbers, they're people's livelihoods, they're Canadian families. Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders have both come out against this deal. The Liberals are not only willing to accept a worse deal than the U.S., but they admit that they have no studies of its impact on Canadians. Will the Liberals commit to completing a thorough impact assessment and then making the study public?
Here, here.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have been clear on our commitment to engage with Canadians before taking a final position on the TPP. In fact, this government has already held over nearly 200 consultations. But Canada needs to stay at the table, and that's why the Minister of Trade will sign today. Simply a technical step which will allow for full consideration of the deal. The only way the TPP can take effect is through ratification and a majority vote in this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We'll take that as a no to publishing an impact assessment. Le Premier ministre s'est fait élire en promettant de faire les choses autrement, Monsieur le Président. Pourtant, c'est son gouvernement qui signe aujourd'hui un traité négocié dans le plus grand secret par les conservateurs. Les Canadiens seront directement touchés par cet accord. Des études indépendantes parlent de 60 000 pertes d'emplois ici au Canada. Ce sont des hommes, des femmes, des familles, des communautés qui seront affectées. Pourquoi le Premier ministre s'entête-t-il à faire les mêmes erreurs que son prédécesseur conservateur? Libéraux, conservateurs, même combat, Monsieur le Président.
The Honourable Supplementary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie l'honorable membre de Outremont pour sa question. Le PTP est tombé sur nos assiettes tard dans une campagne électorale. Nous avons agi d'une façon très responsable. On a dit qu'on va étudier l'accord. C'est exactement ce qu'on va faire. Il faut faire des études, il faut consulter les Canadiens à travers le pays, et c'est exactement ce qu'on est en train de faire.
La députée d'Outremont.
Il dit qu'il faut faire des études, donc il vient d'admettre qu'ils n'ont pas d'études et pourtant ils signent aujourd'hui. L'économie va mal. L'assurance-emploi aussi fait l'objet de nombreuses promesses, puis ils n'ont rien fait. The Prime Minister will arrive in Alberta where thousands of workers have lost their jobs. I sure hope he arrives as something more than hang in there, which we heard him say recently. Will the government ensure these workers and their families get the support they need by getting rid of the conservative restrictions and extending employment insurance benefits? And will this be done immediately?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question and the sincerity of concern for working Canadians. Just like on this side of the House, our goal is to have a strong economy, and where we unfortunately see Canadians laid off, to provide a modernized employment insurance system that will be there for when they need it. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisgar.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Liberals introduced another layer of red tape for energy infrastructure, but what they actually are doing is severely shaking investors' confidence in Canada. In fact, Période Beattie, President and CEO of the Canadian Chambre of Commerce, said that good governance does not mean additional hurdles at the last minute, referring to the Liberal plan. When will the minister stop killing jobs with these delays, with all of this uncertainty, Mr. Speaker?
The Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member for a question. As the Liberal Party knows well, the only way to get resources to market in the 21st century is to do it in a sustainable way. That is exactly what we're doing. We introduced principles last week, transitory principles that will reestablish the trust in Canadians in this process, and that is the way we will get resources to market. Thank you.
Member for Portage-Lisgar.
What Mr. Beattie said in response to that plan was, when global businesses sit down and decide where to invest, the uncertainty and overly politicized nature of Canada's environmental regulatory process is a strike against us. Mr. Speaker, it's becoming clear that the government has put this process in place so that they can rubber stamp a no on good energy projects. Why else would they continue to torpedo Canadian jobs?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je veux remercier ma collègue pour sa question. Nous savons que la seule façon qu'on va pouvoir avoir les ressources au marché, c'est de faire ça d'une manière responsable. Nous avons dépolitisé le processus par introduire des principes transitoires qui vont rétablir la confiance des Canadiens. C'est comme ça qu'on va pouvoir avoir les ressources au marché.
Bravo.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Griesbach.
Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the Liberals voted against supporting the Energy East pipeline.
Shameful.
It's hard to imagine any MP from Edmonton voting against safe and sustainable pipelines, but two of them did.
Shameful.
Where I come from, the energy industry is so respected, we even named our hockey team after it.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, will the Infrastructure Minister from Edmonton Millwoods tell Edmontonians why he did not support this shovel-ready, job-creating infrastructure project?
Where is it?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I'd like to reiterate, unfortunately to the Conservatives, Canadians lost trust in our environmental assessment process. The only way we will get resources to markets is if we re-establish the trust of Canadians. That is exactly what the Minister of Resources and I did last week by introducing transitory principles. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Confederation.
Speaker, I'd like to read a quote. Rest assured, when elected, I will pound on the table on the need for pipelines. It is the safest to transport oil, and it's in the national interest. Who said this to gain votes during the election? The member from Calgary Centre. The member voted against a motion that would affirm this House's support for workers in the energy sector and pipeline development. When he did that, was he pounding on the table or was he selling out?
The Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Well, I thank the member for the question. I'm proud to be with a government who sees energy and the economy as two sides of the same coin. Here we have a time where Canadians have lost confidence in our system, and now we're reintroducing principles that will allow us to get access to markets, something that the former government failed miserably to do.
For Edmonton Riverbend.
Mr. Speaker, when the Minister for Innovation, Science and Economic Development stood up and talked about his yet-to-be-announced investment plan, in typical Liberal fashion, he forgot about the West. This anti-energy Liberal government has gone out of its way to kill jobs in Western Canada. How can the Mississauga Minister for Alberta, who just voted to kill a shovel-ready job-creating pipeline, be trusted to do what's best for Western Canada?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear when it comes to the economy. We have a strong growth agenda, and that agenda speaks to Canadians from coast to coast to coast, Mr. Speaker. We're creating a social contract when it comes to pipelines. We're working with the aerospace sector, the automotive sector, the life sciences sector, Mr. Speaker. We have a government that understands the importance of building strong relationships with industry to make sure we create high value-added, good quality jobs, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we'll continue to do for coming months to come.
The Honourable Member for Barrie Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, meanwhile in Ontario, the once proud economic engine of Canada languishes as a have-not province under an incompetent Liberal government at Queen's Park. Wow. Ontario has 500,000 people looking for work. Young people like my kids face especially dismal job prospects. Add to that, Ontario is pressing forward with a job-killing payroll tax scheme that will cost 54,000 jobs. Mr. Speaker, is the government's plan to grow jobs in Ontario simply to hire Kathleen Wynne's staff to run the office of the Prime Minister? Is that all you got?
Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the member opposite that we have a government that understands the importance of working in collaboration with our provincial and municipal counterparts. And that's exactly what we're doing in Ontario, Mr. Speaker. We have made announcements for Southwest Ontario, for Northern Ontario, Mr. Speaker. We are making investments in the auto sector, Mr. Speaker. We understand the importance of manufacturing as well, Mr. Speaker. And we have a plan when it comes to growing the economy, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we'll continue to do in Ontario and across the country, Mr. Speaker.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. On apprend aujourd'hui que 1000 demandes d'indemnisation pour les torts causés dans les pensionnats autochtones ont été rejetées sur une technicalité administrative. Cette attitude va à l'encontre de la réconciliation, Monsieur le Président. Le Parlement a pourtant offert des excuses officielles. Les victimes ont assez souffert et le gouvernement doit être cohérent avec ses intentions. Qu'entend faire la ministre de la Justice pour corriger cette honteuse situation?
Minister of Indigenous Affairs.
Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement du Canada est engagé à la réussite de la mise en œuvre de la Convention de règlement sur les pensionnats indiens et à honorer toutes ses obligations en vertu de la Convention. J'ai demandé à mon ministère d'examiner cet enjeu dans une manière urgente.
Member for Timmins, James Bay.
I'm not sure if the Honourable Minister heard the question. The question was to the Justice Department. What we've learned is that 1,000 victims of sexual and physical abuse from the residential schools had their cases thrown out on a legal, flimsy technicality, which is the children who are abused in institutions run by the government are not somehow eligible for compensation by the government. This travesty was conjured up in the Department of the Justice Department, and I'm asking the Minister as their boss, will she do the right thing? Will she tell this House that those cases will be reopened and that justice will be done? I'm asking her to answer for her officials.
Hear, hear. Minister of Indigenous Affairs.
Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the member needs to know that my department is the client. That the Minister of Justice's department actually gives advice. I have asked my department to look into this, and we're going to look into it in a very serious manner right now.
Right, that's all.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer, Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Liberal House Leader got it wrong. He tried to justify his interference with citizenship judges and the Immigration and Refugee Board just because he didn't like who was appointed.
That is shocking.
Mr. Speaker, these people were already appointed, and he has no right to use his position to intimidate them.
Hear, hear.
Judicial independence is paramount. These judges and tribunal members make rulings on matters between the government and Canadians. Yes. Will they now feel pressured to side with this new Liberal government in order to keep their jobs?
Let him resign.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, let's see how far that member is prepared to go. Is he prepared to go about 25 metres outside in the foyer and repeat those exact same comments? That would be interesting to see how far he is.
Monsieur le Président, un chat, c'est un chat. De l'ingérence politique, c'est de l'ingérence politique. Quand le leader du gouvernement a communiqué avec les juges de la Commission de l'immigration et du statut de réfugié, il savait qu'il entraverait directement leur travail. Dans le passé, un comportement identique a obligé des ministres à démissionner. Jusqu'où les libéraux sont-ils prêts à s'abaisser dans leur interprétation des règles d'éthique?
Monsieur le Président, je vais vous dire exactement où nous irons pas. Nous irons pas à l'endroit où l'ancien gouvernement s'est trouvé quand ils ont attaqué d'une façon publique et systématique la juge en chef de la Cour suprême du Canada. Monsieur le Président, c'est ça quelque chose que nous ne ferons pas.
Monsieur le Président, comme je viens de le mentionner, de l'ingérence politique, c'est de l'ingérence politique. Il n'est pas seulement question du leader du gouvernement à la Chambre. Dans sa propre lettre, il indique qu'il a écrit au nom du premier ministre. Pourquoi le premier ministre estime-t-il qu'il a le droit de s'immiscer ouvertement dans les affaires des juges et des membres d'organismes quasi-judiciaires?
Honorable député en Chambre. Monsieur le Président, merci. Vous savez, le gouvernement a décidé que la façon que ces gens-là ont été nommés à des postes qui allaient prendre conséquence après l'élection et d'une façon complètement non transparente était un abus du processus. Et c'est ça l'ancien gouvernement, Monsieur le Président, qui a essayé d'abuser un processus de nomination politique, et c'est pourquoi j'ai écrit à ces gens-là sur une question de personnel et non pas une question de substance, et le député le sait fort bien.
The member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, it's outrageous the government won't study the impacts of the TPP before signing on the dotted line. But we know the deal would have serious consequences for Canadians. Tens of thousands of jobs lost, higher drug costs, stifled innovation, rising inequality. We all know that if the minister didn't support this deal, she wouldn't sign it. Is the minister rushing to sign the deal to try to get it done before Canadians know how much it will hurt them?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question. The signing of the TPP is a technical step. The real important moment, Mr. Speaker, is the date of ratification. Before that decision is made, we will put this matter to Parliament. Parliamentary committee will study it. Canadians across the country will have a chance to pronounce on it, and we will undertake expert opinion. And therefore, we are doing precisely what we promised, Mr. Speaker, which is to study the accord properly before ratifying it.
Monsieur le Président, la situation économique inquiète les Canadiens et c'est le temps de prendre des bonnes décisions. Mais le gouvernement s'entête à signer un accord qui va nous coûter 60 000 emplois, augmenter les inégalités et faire mal à nos producteurs laitiers. Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement n'a même pas pris le temps de faire une étude des enjeux importants dans le partenariat transpacifique. Comment le gouvernement peut-il signer une entente qui n'est pas bon pour les Canadiens?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire du ministre du Commerce international.
Monsieur le Président, nous allons signer exactement pour nous donner 2 temps pour examiner un accord qui est très, très complexe. Il y a évidemment des consultations qui ont lieu jusqu'ici. Il y a des secteurs de la population qui sont pour, des secteurs qui sont contre. nous allons procéder avec des consultations, surtout à travers le comité de Parlement, et c'est ce Parlement qui va avoir le dernier mot, Monsieur le Speaker. Monsieur le Président.
Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, dry conditions across the interior of British Columbia and throughout the western provinces in 2015 created significant hardships for our farmers. In my riding of Kelowna Lake Country and throughout Western Canada, we have some of the best farmers in the world who are focused on building a better future. Can the Minister of Agriculture inform the House what measures the government is taking to address the situation facing farmers affected by last year's drought?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague from Kelowna Lake Country for his question. Extreme weather created difficulties for Western Canadian livestock industry last summer. This week, our government released a list of additional regions for tax deferrals in many areas throughout the western provinces, which will help farmers focus on the future. Since taking office, we have announced over $50 million in cost-shared funding. Mr. Speaker, our government supports our hard-working farmers and ranchers. Thank you, Mr.
Monsieur
le Président, les attentats terroristes se multiplient. Ça fait des semaines qu'on attend le plan, mais silence radio de la part du gouvernement. Hier, les journalistes ont questionné le ministre de la Défense sur les plans du Canada, mais ce dernier les a référés à son collègue responsable des Affaires étrangères en voyage à Rome. Est-ce que le ministre de la Défense peut prendre ses responsabilités ou dois-je poser la question à quelqu'un d'autre?
Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, the attacks that are happening around the world is not just focused on one plan. First of all, I want to let the honourable member also know is that on a daily basis, our security agency are working in cooperation with our allies on many different attacks. Unfortunately, I can't divulge this information due to security issues. However, in terms of the actual plan for Operation Impact, it will be coming soon, and it will be a plan that Canadians can be proud of. Thank you.
Pourtant, Monsieur le Président, le ministre affirme dans le rapport de performance de la Défense nationale qu'il va participer à des opérations de la coalition à l'étranger. Est-ce que le ministre peut nous dire comment il va aider nos alliés et lutter contre les terroristes en retirant nos forces de combat en Syrie et en Irak?
The Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, we are not withdrawing from the fight against terrorism. Also, we are not withdrawing from the fight against ISIL. We will be enhancing our fight against ISIL, and when the plan comes out, it will be a plan that Canadians can be proud of. Thank you.
The member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, instead of the Defence Minister talking about mistakes of the past, let's talk about mistakes of the present. Taking our CF-18s out of the air combat mission is a mistake. His delays are a mistake. Incoherent comments are a mistake. Undermining Canada's reputation is a mistake. When will the Minister of Defence quit dithering, admit his mistakes, and finally give us the plan to fight ISIS?
The Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the plan will be coming out soon. I can assure the member of that. When it comes to the stopping of the airstrikes, yes, our government is committed to that. However, we are committed to the fight, and I have done a thorough assessment by going into the region twice, meeting with commanders on the ground, speaking with my coalition partners and to my partners also within the Iraqs and the northern the Kurds as well. And when the plan comes out, it will be a plan that Canadians can be proud of. Thank you.
Now the member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the first command ordered by Chief of Defence Staff Jonathan Vance was to establish Operation Honour to eliminate sexual misconduct in the military. General Vance explicitly stated this will require a cultural change within the armed forces. However, the Minister of Defence contradicted General Vance and said it's not the military culture per se that leads to sexual misconduct. Why is the Minister making the mistake of brushing off the serious issue of sexual misconduct in the military?
Now, the Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, the Chief of Defence Staff, General Vance, and I are in lockstep with this. We have a zero tolerance for any type of sexual misconduct or any type of harassment, and we will stomp this out. Thank you.
Honorable député de Laurier-Saint-Marie.
Monsieur le Président, la mission de bombardement contre le groupe armé État islamique, initiée par les conservateurs, prend fin dans quelques semaines à peine. Et non seulement le gouvernement ne nous a pas encore soumis son nouveau plan, mais là, on apprend que peut-être le plan en question ne serait pas soumis au Parlement. Monsieur le Président, l'ouverture et la transparence, ça devrait être plus qu'un slogan. Alors, ma question est pour le ministre de la Défense. Va-t-il mettre fin à la confusion et confirmer qu'il y aura un débat et un vote en Chambre?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, we have been consulting, as I said, first myself with my colleagues and the coalition. The plan will be discussed as to exactly the mechanism how that will also come out when we announce the plan. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Esquimalt, Saanich-Sooke.
Mr. Speaker, the government promised to end the bombing mission in Iraq, yet it's still continuing. The government said it will come up with a new plan, and again, Canadians are still waiting. When the Minister of Defence was asked a simple question about whether there will be a vote in the House, yesterday he said, and I quote, "You can't just answer yes or no." Actually, we think that should be possible, so let me ask the Minister again. Will the Minister of Defence confirm that this House will hold a debate and a vote on the government's new mission in Iraq? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the timeline for how long it's taken, Canadians expect us to get this right. When we send our men and women into harm's way, we need to make sure that the plan is right, and that when they go into dealing with in a high-threat environment, that we're going to look after their interests and making sure. And there will be a consultation as to the consultation in the House that will be announced when the announcement is made. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have likely irresponsibly promised to immediately remove the visa requirement on Mexico. Before making this statement, had the Minister's Department conducted a full, formal visa review on Mexico to assess whether or not conditions meet Canada's objective, evidence-based thresholds to safely grant a visa exemption? And if not, doesn't the Minister want to know the facts from a formal visa review before deciding whether it's in Canada's best interest to immediately grant a visa exemption?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as my colleague across the aisle probably knows, this was in our platform to remove the visa. This is a major step in improving Canada-Mexico relations. I have been in consultation with my department on the issues involved in this. We have been studying it carefully, and I am pleased to report that the Foreign Affairs Minister had a very positive meeting recently with his Mexican and American counterparts.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I'll take it that that was a political decision and not an evidence-based decision. Anyways, Mr. Speaker, with regard to today's American Senate hearing on Canada's fast-track refugee initiative, how many times has the minister's agency briefed the U.S. Department of Homeland Security on this issue? And, Mr. Speaker, if the minister is so confident on the integrity of this process, why are they boycotting this hearing by refusing to send senior officials to represent Canadian interests?
The Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the short answer is we're accountable in this House and not in the U.S. Senate. That's how Canadian accountability works. However, Ambassador Doer was in touch with the Senate to confirm what the U.S. government has been told in repeated briefings right from day one. That is, Canada has layers of security screening work in place that are working very effectively under the guidance of Immigration and Refugees Canada, the Canada Border Services Agency, CSIS, and the RCMP. The system is strong, and there will be no compromise on safety.
The Honourable Member for Markham-Unionville.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government has been eager to make promises without plans. The refugees resettlement plan is failing. Health workers volunteering with Syrian refugees are confused about how many refugees are coming, what sort of care they will need, and who is going to foot the bill. Mr. Speaker, when is this Liberal government going to provide a real plan that works for refugees?
Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to say we have a real plan, and it is evolving as it ought to evolve. We are now at close to 16,000 refugees. We will hit our target of 25,000 by the end of February. The refugees are settling across the country. I just read a story about a wonderful case of 2 Syrian refugees working in a New Brunswick restaurant where they had not been able to find anyone who could cook the Middle Eastern food, and they are doing fantastically well in New Brunswick with a job already.
Monsieur le Président, en parlant du Nouveau-Brunswick, les gens du Madawaska-Restigouche s'inquiètent de la situation économique au pays et veulent savoir comment ils peuvent faire connaître leurs opinions et leurs inquiétudes. Pour ma part, la semaine prochaine, j'organise dans les villes d'Edmundston et de Campbellton des réunions publiques à laquelle j'invite les gens à venir partager leurs idées et leurs inquiétudes. Le ministre des Finances peut-il informer cette Chambre sur les autres mesures mises en place pour que tous les Canadiens et tous les Acadiens puissent participer au processus budgétaire?
Ministre des Finances.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci aux députés de Madawaska-Restigouche. Je suis fier du fait que notre département est en train de mener les consultations pré-budgétaires les plus ouvertes de l'histoire. À date, nous avons rejoint 150 000 personnes et 3 500 d'entre eux ont fait des soumissions formelles, presque 3 fois le nombre de soumissions reçues par le gouvernement précédent. Les consultations se poursuivent sur budget.gc.ca et j'invite tous les Canadiens à y participer.
Monsieur le Président, sur recommandation de l'Ombudsman, le Parti conservateur s'est engagé à émettre une carte d'identification personnelle pour tous les vétérans. Ce serait une carte donnée lors de la libération des forces armées, et ce, peu importe la durée du service militaire, Monsieur le Président. Aujourd'hui, le gouvernement songe à cesser la production de la vieille carte d'identification, qui est ni une carte spécifique de vétérans, ni donnée automatiquement suite à la libération des forces. Le gouvernement peut-il nous assurer qu'il la remplacera immédiatement par une vraie carte d'identification officielle pour les vétérans et non par une carte à rabais comme il entend le faire avec la carte CF1 proposée?
Honorable ministre des Anciens combattants.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his question. I'm also the Associate Minister of National Defense, and that means I'm working hard with my partners in national defense to look at ways that we can do to ensure there's a seamless transition in between national defense and Veterans Affairs. We're identifying those possibilities where we can work forward and to allow for our veterans, in fact, our people serving, to get the systems they need in place. Thank you for the question.
Ce matin, les Québécois ont appris une bien mauvaise nouvelle. Un des fleurons de notre économie, Rona, va être vendu aux Américains. Pour l'instant, l'entreprise américaine se fait rassurante sur le maintien du siège social et des emplois, mais on a tous déjà joué dans ce film-là, puis on se rappelle de Rio Tinto et compagnie. Le gouvernement a le mandat d'examiner les prises de contrôle étrangères de nos compagnies, de les approuver ou de les rejeter. Est-ce que le ministre du Développement économique s'engage à faire une révision de cette transaction afin d'avoir des garanties claires pour protéger nos jobs, et est-ce que cette révision va être rendue publique?
Bravo. Honorable ministre du Développement économique.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. As the member opposite knows, that the shareholders need to review this particular transaction. The Competition Bureau will also look at this particular investment transaction as well, Mr. Speaker. And as per the Investment Canada Act, any amount over $600 million does trigger a net benefit analysis. We will make sure we follow that process, Mr. Speaker. We will always look what's in the best interest of Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Speaker, Lyme disease is a serious issue. I've listened to several constituents coping with the debilitating symptoms and treatment challenges. Est-ce que la ministre de la Santé peut informer la Chambre des intentions du gouvernement et l'amélioration de la prévention, la détection précoce et un traitement efficace de la maladie de Lyme?
Honorable ministre de Santé.
Mr.
Mr. Speaker, Lyme disease does have a devastating impact on families and communities. We welcome the passing of Bill C-442, an act respecting a federal framework on Lyme disease, and very much look forward to developing that federal framework along with our partners, stakeholders, including patient groups. We are working to deliver a robust conference this coming May, which will help shape the federal framework. The Public Health Agency of Canada has also developed an action plan on Lyme disease to build awareness of the risks and better track the disease, as well as investing in more research. Thank you.
Very good.
The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Justice. She's the Attorney General of Canada and the Chief Law Officer of the Crown, responsible for upholding the rule of law at all times. Last June, Parliament passed the Reform Act. As a result, Section 49.8 of the Parliament of Canada Act required her and her cabinet colleagues to vote in 4 separate recorded votes last November 5th, determining which powers the Prime Minister would have. Did she and her cabinet colleagues comply with the law? Did they vote 4 times in 4 separate recorded votes last November 5th?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for the question. I want to tell him that many of us on this side supported the Reform Act. I myself voted for it, and I want to assure the House and the member that at all times, everyone on this side complied with all legislation.
L'honorable député de Pierre-Boucher, les Verchères.
Monsieur le Président, Lowe's, le géant de la quincaillerie américaine, a offert 3,2 milliards pour acheter Rona. Alors qu'on sait que Rona s'approvisionne auprès d'une foule de fournisseurs québécois, dont par exemple les pelles Garant ou les fabricants de bois d'œuvre au Québec. Selon la loi sur l'investissement au Canada, le ministre de l'Industrie peut autoriser la transaction, peut aussi la refuser et peut y poser des conditions. On sait que le ministre va suivre le processus, mais on voudrait savoir qu'est-ce qu'il compte faire concrètement pour protéger les fournisseurs et le siège social de Boucherville.
The Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, as I had mentioned before, the Competition Bureau will look at this particular transaction. The shareholders have to also look at this particular transaction. And when it comes to the federal government, the responsibility that I have, as per the Investment Canada Act, there's a process in place, there's resources in place to do a proper net benefit analysis, and we will do that, Mr. Speaker, because it's very, very important that we follow this process in the best interest of Canadians, Mr. Speaker.